Well, hey there. Welcome into another episode of Story World. Steve Schramm here with my boy Al. What's up, dude?
Well, I just got back from a excellent Mexican dinner with a good old pal of mine, and
Yeah,
boy, was it good.
it was so good. That chori pollo, man.
Ooh, makes me want to
So
go
good,
back right now.
right? Yeah, you said during dinner that you could literally eat it every day, and I
I
totally
think I
agree.
could.
I
I,
could
I really think I
absolutely eat
could.
it every day. It's
Absolutely,
pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing.
especially
So
after
the
going all day without eating, and then the dinner
Right?
comes.
Yeah,
Back
that
on top.
OMAD life. Yeah, dude.
Yep.
Same here. I did, after my exercise, 'cause, today was leg day.
Nice.
So, right before church and after my exercise, I had a little snack to kinda help hold me over because I
Yeah.
didn't wanna have a headache. So, I did that,
Yeah.
but
Makes sense.
otherwise, that was my only meal. So,
Good.
yeah,
Gotcha.
man. Good. So, today's episode is all about, fiction, and I'm excited to talk about this. We're gonna kinda talk through, is it a time waster? Does it just, like, suck your life away, if you get enthralled by fiction, or is it something that is beneficial? And I'm gonna kick it over to Alex, but I actually have a quick little story, about this, to kick us off. So, my wife's been having some trouble, sleeping, and I suggested to her, because she used to read a lot and she hasn't done it in a while. And so I suggested that, she download some books on the Kindle or whatever, because some people, find it helpful to actually go to sleep. This is
Mhm.
something that could be arguably be beneficial, right? You actually can read in that sort of, especially if you're using like an e-paper device or something like that, it might be easier on your eyes. And so a lot of people like to go to sleep by first reading a little bit, and then that sort of helps them go to sleep. Well, I suggested that to her. She bought some books, started to do it, and instead of going to sleep, it has made her insomnia worse because she literally couldn't put the books down and read through like whatever, like like three books of this series in the course of just a week or two. So anyway, that plan kind of backfired. So what say you, Alex? Time waster, beneficial? Let's kick this off.
That's a good story. So I mean, for me, you're asking the guy who just loves fiction, and so, gee, I wonder what my answer is going to be. I will take a little roundabout approach to it, though. So it's funny when we do think about it. It seems like kind of you can almost with any type of spectrum, whether it's political or religious or anything else, you kind of have your two ends of the spectrum where you have some people where all they do is read, all they do is talk about what they read. And even for me, I have a hard time talking to those people because I kind of just say, hey, get your head out of the book a little bit. Let's talk about some real life stuff. And on the other hand, you have people who it's hard to kind of spark any type of creativeness out of, or just talking about something fun, or even joking around and making some like lighthearted jokes about just anything that is a little bit untrue or in the realm of fictionality. And it's kind of hard to associate with those people too. And so obviously those are kind of extremes and something fits in the middle. Probably none of those sides are very healthy, at least 100%. You probably should get your nose out of a book every once in a while, or you probably actually should read a book every once in a while. So obviously, it's kind of a broad spectrum of things. So I kind of, before I get into my nitty gritty, I kind of want to hear from you, Steve, on kind of where you personally might fit in that spectrum for you as far as how you got introduced to reading fiction or wanting to get into fiction, and just kind of your introduction to getting into that side of things.
Yeah. No, that's good. So I really love the way you laid that out. I have ignored fiction for most of my life, right? So obviously I was a kid, my mom read to me. We've actually talked about that before. My mom did read to me a lot, and so I enjoyed it then. And of course, like most people, I watch movies and TV shows. I love Star Trek, which is arguably prophecy, not fiction. Uh, but most would say that it's fiction, so I guess I'll have to go along with them.
Yeah.
Um, and so I the problem is once I got to the point of being in a position where I would have to make the choice to read fiction for myself, right? So I'm not counting, mom's reading to me, or I'm forced to read a particular book to do a book report in school. Not counting those things, I really never chose fiction for the majority of my life. And honestly, that just became, it's like when I got into high school, I got it like that's when that time really arose for me is when I would have made that choice for myself. And that's when band came in and music took over my life. And after music, I mean, music took over my life for quite a long time, probably a little over a decade. And then when that phased out, business came in and that has occupied my time until basically now. And when I got into business, I very much got into nonfiction reading. Started out with reading books about weight loss because I wanted to learn how to sort of turn my life around from that regard. So I started there. Then I started reading books about theology and philosophy and starting to learn more about that sort of thing. And and then of course once I got into business, well, that opened up a whole new world of reading lots about business and marketing and things like that. And so, I mean, of course, like again, I interacted with fiction in movies and TV shows, but even so, like not as much as a lot of other people do. And so I guess I can say that I lost my appreciation for fiction honestly for quite some time. I'm only now sort of rediscovering it. And thanks to you, to be honest. It's thanks to conversations that we have had. Um, that even led to doing this podcast and those sorts of things that really brought fiction back into my life as something that I choose. Now, even today, just to be honest, I still struggle with, it feels like, and this is actually a really, really good topic. It feels like a time waster. Okay. So this is my issue is if I have time to read a book, I've got 400 unread books on my Kindle, something crazy, some crazy number like that. At any given time, I have 400 books that I have not finished that I have either started or they're totally unread. The vast majority, by which I mean like if there's 400 even, I've got 398, you know, nonfiction and maybe
Yeah.
two fiction, something like that. And it just always seems like the right choice is to read the nonfiction, right? The fiction feels like a time waster in that moment. And so I'm still learning to choose fiction instead of nonfiction. Um, Another thing, pertinent to the question that you asked is I find that it tends to be different kinds of people. Now, this is not, I'm going to make a statement that might sound controversial. Um, And as a blanket statement, I think it's true though. Now, maybe what it means, different people might interpret, but I'm just going to tell you what I mean because this is partly my podcast, and so I get to do that. And so typically, you mentioned how you've got people on different sides of the spectrum. Some people engrossed in fiction, other people um, really engrossed in the real world. Maybe only certain people kind of get that delicate balance. Um, Again, this is not going to apply to everybody, but as a broad generalization, I think you tend to see the fictional types, the people who are buried in fiction. I think you tend to see those people to be more sort of progressive ideologically, and people who read a lot of fiction, or excuse me, a lot of nonfiction, uh, seem to be again broad spectrum, a little bit more conservative. Um, Ideologically. And so, again, I'm not necessarily going to speculate on what that means, but it's interesting to me that books that are not really about what's going on in the real world, they're more imaginative, maybe a little more colorful, a little more creative. Those sort of lend themselves to the types who think more progressively, versus the nonfiction, the books that deal with the stuff, the now. A lot of, I would say those people the people who focus on that stuff tend to have a more almost realistic mindset, a mindset that deals with things in reality. They're a little bit more conservative maybe because they maybe understand things about how history, worked and progressed. So again, I'm making some generalizations, but those are just the observations based on the question that you asked me.
Interesting. I love this podcast, Steve. It I know that's a change of kind of pace, but I just love how literally Steve and I tonight got together. We went out to eat, and then after the dinner, we said, "So, what are we going to talk about tonight?" And we said, "I don't know. We'll figure out later." So we came here, listed off our topics, and we saw, oh, fiction, a time waster, beneficial. Well, we should have stuff to talk about there, and then we just
Yeah.
listed it down. It's great how, um, throughout this whole ordeal, I have come to realize even more so how important um the marketing in business and selling yourself and everything is, and how important that is. And at the same token, how you see that incorporating some type of fictional flair or seeing the value in that. And
Yeah.
so it's just really cool. But so
Yeah.
to kind of continue on what you were saying, it is kind of obviously that yeah, the stereotype, kind of what you said, is it painting with a broad brush. But just looking at you and me, you and I are, I would say, you know, 90% or whatever, very similar minded in our worldview and how we think about things. We're pretty, I would say we're fairly aligned. But then just with not anything drastic, but just some simple stuff, I tend to be a little bit more what's the word? Not open, but a little bit kind of loosey goosey with just kind of some fun stuff and letting go. I,
Yeah.
you're creative. I wouldn't necessarily say creativity, but just kind of how it is. And so, yeah, I can
Yeah.
kind of see how even just a little tendency with kind of the fictional side of things, people tend to
Yeah.
kind of get their heads in the clouds a little bit, and a little bit more leaning towards that type. That's a kind of interesting observation.
Yeah, I've never really thought about it before, but I do
Yeah.
I do, I think it's true. Now there's obvious there's counter examples, of course.
Yeah,
That's not
obviously.
my point, of
Yeah.
course. But I think, broad brush out. What does it mean? I don't know, but that's why we're talking about it.
So we're talking
But
about it. Steve and I don't know anything, so we're just
yeah,
saying stuff. We're just blabbing
it's
it.
good. Yeah.
So kind of going to my initial thoughts on it, I'm gonna kind of start with the negative approach where I think you might have touched on it a little bit, but I do see some negativity with fiction. And I'll explain. So I kind of look at it again, painting with a broad brush, but we don't have time to get onto the stats and nuances and doing research. Um, so I would say, broadly speaking, two kinds of people. Say there's someone who's either invested in their work or goes on their job and comes home and their hobby is sports or playing video games, just very casual sports. They're happy with just having fun on the side, not really motivated to start their own business or, get into writing like a research paper, and that all that's fine. I'm just saying just that's just broadly speaking one type of person. And for that person like that, I can see how simply speaking as a fun hobby, fiction is just extremely beneficial just as something to enjoy. You go home and you might watch, just a show that you're into. Maybe it's the new Kenobi series coming up or something else. And you just have fun, with your kids or with your spouse or even by yourself and just relax. At that point, I don't really see fiction as a time waster. Obviously, if it's taking up time from like other important things like spending time with your kids or something, then yes. But just on the face surface of it, the beneficiality of it is enjoying your time and enjoying what people have created and enjoying art and what's been presented to you. Now on the flip side, where you have someone kind of specifically speaking to your line of work too, but especially someone who like me or anyone else who really wants to focus on fiction storytelling in whatever medium that is, how fiction actually can be a very much so a time waster. And really it comes down to productivity in spending less time being productive on your own things and being sucked into the things that you want to do. And I think we have
Mhm.
all have been there, and especially me, and it's been really tough for me in life where not so much shows, every once in a while a show, but for me it's mostly books or a very well made video game with intricate storytelling where it's so easy to get sucked into just being involved in that. And even though that can be beneficial from learning from it for and giving you ideas on what you want to write and what you want to take from it, it can absolutely drain out all of your time. And at some point, the beneficial the benefits of being invested into those fictional stories, whether it's reading or playing a video game or a show or a movie, um, ends up inhibiting you and your time and taking away from your time and actually
Mhm.
producing what you want to. So that kind of shifts gear a little bit on fiction itself, I would think is beneficial, but from someone who actually wants to be productive and do something with it, it can definitely be unproductive and very unbeneficial for someone like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting you say that too because I think this cuts both ways. I mean, I see this in myself, frankly, uh on the nonfiction side. So an example of that is I mean this podcast is just one example of lots of content that I like to produce. I mentioned in a previous episode that I'm starting to do a lot more written blog content now and sort of shifting away from some of the podcast stuff for data driven strategic reasons and also some gut and emotional reasons. And and so it's really interesting. I've got on the nonfiction side, I know we're not talking about nonfiction, but I'm gonna try to tie
Yeah.
this up here. Um, I've got a book that I've been working on for, a year and a half, 2 years now, that we've talked about before, for my ministry. It's a book called, at least the working title is How to Love the Bible. And, I'm like I'm like a chapter or maybe I know I might have finished the last chapter. I'm like a conclusion away or something
Mhm.
from like getting this finished, getting this in the hands of some people to read, getting this, reading back through it myself for
Yep.
proofreading purposes and making edits and such. And then of course on the business side, there's lots of stuff I want to write about. Uh, but I can't help but find myself being drawn back into YouTube
Mm,
to watch other people talk
mm,
about what they're creating. And for some reason, I don't know if it's, what the dopamine hit is, but in the time that I spend watching other people talk about what they're creating, I could have created lots of
mm,
my own stuff. And so I think what I want to do is I want to say, yeah, I agree with you that fiction can be a time waster in that way. I would just like to also say that yeah, that knife cuts both ways. I mean, it actually
mhm.
that same sort of thing can apply to, doing work in the nonfiction realm as well. And so maybe a good thing to sort of tie that together and put a pin on that piece of it is just when you decide that it's important to you to be a producer versus
Mhm.
just a consumer, you do need to be really intentional about that balance because production is what makes the world go around. Guys like us who are doing this podcast and stuff like I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy, right? Because we're a small time, whatever. But like, we're advancing knowledge. I mean, I don't think we would be doing this just. I mean, yeah, sure, it's really fun to talk to you about this
Yes.
balance, but we don't have to do it with the record button pressed, right?
Mhm.
We could just do this over dinner, or whatever. But instead, we're trying to advance knowledge, and so we're trying to do something in the world, and that's because fundamentally we're producers and not just consumers. And so I think we have to, and I'm borrowing from Atlas Shrugged there. If anybody catches that reference, in a group of story nerds, probably would. But anyway, that's the point, right? Is just kind of being intentional, not to let it waste your time. I don't think there's anything. Maybe it's a willpower thing. I don't know, but I'd say whether you're a fiction or a nonfiction writer, yeah, like you should be intentional about your time producing. And now, okay, this seems maybe a silly question for you, but, so for me, I schedule things. I schedule everything. Like, I one of the things I'm thinking about lately is, it's very important to actually to have time to think, and there are people who even talk about scheduling time to think. Would it be silly or, like, have you ever done it or whatever to, like, schedule time to read fiction? Or because here's my problem is when I come up on an empty slot of time in that moment, I now have to decide what I'm going to do. And the easier thing on a whim is always to read what somebody else did. Consuming is always easier than producing. This is why you don't get bored and say, "Oh, I think I'll make a YouTube video." No, you get
Yeah.
bored and you say, "Oh, I think I'll go to YouTube and watch something that somebody else
Yeah.
made." So is there a way to is I don't know, is there a way to do this to be more intentional about that? I mean, do you think it's silly to schedule reading time? I don't know. Thoughts?
So, it's funny because I was actually seriously after this gonna talk to you exactly about this.
Oh,
That's
okay.
yeah. So, yeah. So,
Take it away.
I will take it away. So, Steve and I kind of kind of slacked off last week or so, but Steve and I are kind of each other's what's the word I'm looking for? It's an easy word.
Accountability?
Accountability partner.
Yeah.
Um really just to kind of keep track of our time, make sure we're doing things we're supposed to do. And so what I was going to do after this, and I still will, is kind of send my new job now really allows a lot of consistency with my time schedule. And so I'm able to really schedule out layouts of when I want to work on my video game and work on my book, which is very helpful. And so I was going to share with Steve my schedule afterwards. And maybe sometimes we can put, view it on here on the screen. And once these videos go to YouTube, people can see just as an example. But I actually do schedule out each specific hour, including reading and when I play video games. So
Oh, wow.
and it's twofold. The first thing, which I actually think helps the most, is it limits me so I don't go over those times because video games can get very addicting. Reading a story can get very addicting. So I make sure that one, I do not go above those limits, and two, I make it so that I still do have those times. So if I scheduled every single, way I guess you can call free hour of my time making my video game or writing my book, then that would leave no room for me to actually enjoy playing a video game and getting inspiration from it. And so
Huh.
it's twofold. So yes, I definitely do schedule time for that specifically.
Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Good. That's helpful to know. I mean, I feel like I'm definitely not doing that now, right? For me, I tend to, because I do audiobooks and stuff like that, I tend to relegate my time, reading or engaging with things like that to
Yeah.
time in the car or whatever, and then it's really hard to make the choice to do the fiction thing instead of the nonfiction thing. I don't know, because it feels like a time waster. So I need to, yeah. I mean, that's kind of the whole point, right? Is if it's not actually a time waster, then I need to stop looking at it as a time waster. So
Right. Yeah.
maybe this whole episode is a is a sort of intervention for me. Now, so another thing that I find struggling, or that find myself struggling with here, is everything that I do. I mean, really, the right way to say it is I want to turn it into a business. But there's a temptation for me to make it academic. Like, so for example, right, we do this podcast, we're into, we're talking about fiction stuff or whatever. Well, part of my time consuming now, when I'm randomly, like, maybe I'm eating dinner or eating lunch or something like that, and I have a few minutes that I don't need to think about work necessarily, and so I pull up YouTube and I want to watch a video or something. Well, sometimes I find myself watching Brandon Sanderson lectures. So rather than like just enjoying a book, letting my mind get lost and wondering about, whatever, what I'm finding is I'm engaging with other people who are talking about how they write books, for, I mean, I want to say for no reason. It's maybe not for no reason, right? I do want to understand more about it. I do want to see how it applies to marketing. I do eventually want to write fiction, of my own one day, but that's way down the road likely. And so, uh, my problem is learning just to enjoy a story, or to take time to enjoy a story for its own sake, and not make it something that's a total academic exercise. And, oh, I need to learn all the intricacies about it and the bits and pieces. Sometimes I feel like we should just want to be entertained and not educated.
Mhm.
And I don't know, that's something that I struggle with. I don't know if you have any of that, but I struggle with it big time.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. And that's something where I've tried to, again, it's just trying to focus on what you need to do and limiting taking out the fat. So I would, yeah, same thing. Now there are some things I really do have to, like, for instance, like a tutorial or something on a specific programming feature I want to do for my game. I literally have to learn it. But like what you said, a lot of times we'll listen to a lecture. Like when I listen to Sanderson, I'll get that kind of dopamine high where I'm excited because of what he's succeeded in, and I kind of self motivate myself like, wow, like that could be me. And then it goes nowhere because I'm watching Sanderson still. And so really just trying
Exactly.
to limit your time. At some point you have to cut out 90% of that.
Yeah.
I just whipped that number out of the air, but you have to cut out the time where you want to learn to perfect your knowledge on it and just do it. And that is hard for me. And I'm finally starting to transition into that.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, for me, I always, I mean, that I always mess the quote up, but the quote is something like thoughts disentangle themselves passing through your lips and through pencil tips. Um, point being, much of your learning is not actually spent uh, watching or reading or whatever from somebody else. It's actually you learn by doing, and
Mm.
this is true for most people. And so that's the irony is it's almost
Yeah, right.
we're almost tricking ourselves into thinking we're learning something by consuming and watching. Um, versus, and that's almost the deadly like sickness, almost
Yeah, right.
almost the disease that I have is I'm being entertained by knowledge, right? I'm being entertained
Yes.
by this faux perception of learning instead of doing the hard work to actually learn, which is to do. Now, what
Yes.
do we do about this? Again, I don't know. I'm just saying this is where I'm at, and I really, I feel like overcoming this would make a huge step towards my ability to produce consistently. And I mean, I'm always intrigued by people. I mean, it's like if you write, I don't, God, what's the math? Like if you write 500 words a day, that is that is one that is 182,500 words if I just did that math correctly a year. Okay? That's right? That's like 2 good size nonfiction business books by 500 words a day. And me, I almost find it hard. If I start writing at all, I mean, if I write 20 words, it's almost easier for me to write 1,000 than it is just 500. Like if I get started, I can write 1,000 words, no problem. So I could double that, right? So I could write if I had a consistent writing habit of whatever it was, of actually writing words to the tune of 500 a day or 1,000 a day, whatever, I could write 2 to 4 full length business books over the course of a year. Pretty
That
crazy
that's
if you
all it
think
is, just
about it.
consistency, and that's with everything, and that's what we should remind ourselves of the most is just be
Yes.
consistent. Even if it's for an hour a day, seriously, an hour a day will get you a book a year. It
Yeah.
really will.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
Mm.
So anyway,
Anyway, so
yeah.
Steve, you have some more stuff on your list. Let's go
Yeah.
down through that.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Sounds good. So there's, let's see, how do I want to say this? So, there does seem to be a correlation between successful people and nonfiction readers. Now, I think fiction can definitely make you more creative. It can arguably spark ideas that nonfiction could not. But what I'm getting at here is this mindset of the fact that I think some people really do spend too much time reading fiction, um, and I do wonder if it's like Dave Ramsey. Okay, I'm a big Dave Ramsey fan, and whenever he has people, Dave Ramsey, for anybody who doesn't know, big, financial guru, conservative, Christian, biblical principles of handling money, etc. Third largest privately owned radio show in the world. I guess technically the second largest if you factor in that Rush Limbaugh has passed away. But I know he was one of the top three. Um, and so he whenever he does these what he calls um baby what is it the baby steps whenever they debt free scream. Okay, whenever somebody actually like pays off all of their consumer debt, and they can apply to actually go and be on his radio show and be a part of what they call their debt free um scream segment. So sometimes when that's going on, and then also sometimes when they do what he calls millionaire theme hours. So he'll take an hour of his daily show, and he'll have callers call in who have achieved $1 million net worth. And one of the questions that he likes to ask in this case is, how many nonfiction books do you read in a year? And again, wealth is not a moral good. Money is very much amoral. If you're a crappy person when you're poor, you're probably going to be a crappy person when you're rich. And if you're a great person when you're poor, probably going to be a great person when you're rich. Those sorts of things tend not to change with money, although money can change some people. Um, and so in those groups though, it's always interesting how the people who really seem to have, quote unquote made it, at least by any worldly standard, also happen to be nonfiction readers. And you a lot of people who who aren't, successful by that standard in the real world, um, are not. nonfiction readers, right? They maybe are people who read fiction only to enjoy it or whatever. And I will say, it's easy to say there's nothing wrong with that, and I want to be able to say there's nothing wrong with that, except how many of those people? I mean, I've met them. How many of those people do you know who also complain because the little man can't get ahead? They don't have enough money to make ends meet. Their job doesn't pay them enough. Their bosses treat them like crap. Um, all I'm trying to say is there seems to be a victim mentality thing. And so again, we're talking about fiction. Is it a time waster or is it beneficial? Well, uh, if fiction keeps you from reading nonfiction that can help you develop and help you learn from others and become sort of a conduit of others' knowledge, because reading does produce knowledge, um, then I think it may be a bit of a time waster, especially if you're blaming somebody else that you can't get ahead, or you're blaming somebody else for your circumstances. And that may seem, I mean, again, I live in America. I own a business. I mean, I get to say this from a kind of privileged position, and I want to make everyone aware that I get that. I totally understand that. And yet, people have been reading books, nonfiction books, for thousands upon thousands of years. You can go to a library, you can get a free library card. Like at this point, there's really no excuse for you not to be a reader. Almost no matter where you are. I mean, again, I, at least in America, okay, we're most of our audience, 96.17% to be specific, currently, is in the United States. Okay. And so in talking to people in the United States, it's like, yeah, if you live in the United States, you pretty much have access to nonfiction books. Okay. And so this is about fiction, but if you're a person who reads fiction all the time, but you're complaining because you can't get ahead in your life, maybe you should take a little break from that and also work in some nonfiction and see what others have to say about, again, living and working in the real world, because there does tend to be a correlation there. So what I'm not saying is that people who read only fiction are unsuccessful. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying there's an undeniable connection between being a person who reads nonfiction and what most people think of as, being a success in life and business and work and things like that. And so that's at least something to think about.
Well, it's kind of, I guess it's kind of I can make the comparison. You can tell me if the comparison is wrong, but I think it's a good one where men and women, at least in their behaviors, are generally speaking, pretty much the same as far as, we react happily when something good happens. We react angry when something, upsets us. And generally speaking, it's all the same. But at the outer layers, you have mostly men in prison for violence because men tend to be the largest aggressors. And that's where it starts to stick out, is at those extremes. So if you take,
Yeah,
again, it's a spectrum, if you take the top 10% of people who all they do is read fiction, chances are they're going to be people who, by our standards, are not going to be as successful as maybe the 10% who all they do is read nonfiction to learn. Does that make
very
sense?
true.
So there's definitely
Yeah,
that spectrum. So I would say as a whole, I do agree with you looking at
yeah,
that spectrum range. Yeah. Um,
very cool, very cool.
so I guess I'll go ahead and kind of finish up what I had thought. So I started off on a bummer with saying, kind of led into this whole ordeal about why reading fiction sucks. No, and um, I'm going to go to really. So my benefits. I kind of have um, yeah, three really kind of main points where I think that fiction is very beneficial. The first one is kind of more, I think, geared towards someone like you, Steve. It applies to everyone, but so the first one
Yeah,
I have is stretching your imagination, and I think that applies to, again, I guess, kind of focusing on this one, people who wouldn't necessarily consider themselves, a fiction person who dives into books or loves like
yeah,
fantasy movies, but someone who like you, Steve, where if you're trying to think of maybe reading a fiction book might spark some type of interesting, like character to use for like marketing or an angle to persuade someone into something. So just being able to read a wide variety or watch something that it's fiction and kind of stirs your imagination and gets you invested in the characters can really just kind of help stretch what you can envision for yourself in, I guess you could say, the real world. And another example that I think is great that a lot of people overlook is comedy. Think about comedians
Oh,
where, um, a lot of times, at least most of the good comedians will get up and they'll like tell stories about something that happened in their life or their mother or when they were this and get you all roaring. Where it really, most of those stories are either one, half truths, or two, just totally made up, but they tell the story as if it happened to them. And think how imaginative it is to be able to come up with an idea. Say if something really did happen to them, but they think, man, if I could stretch it this way and get the audience to think about this funny thing happening, I could really get a roar out of them. And so, um, just I guess that kind of falls lightly into the line of fiction, but anything that is kind of made up or make believe for to create for someone an enjoyment out of can just really help with creativity and imagination in that regard. Um,
yeah.
yeah, so that's kind of my first point there.
Yeah, I like that. Uh, Ravi Zacharias, used to talk about this idea of not losing your sense of wonder.
Mm,
There's others who talked about this as well. But basically the idea being when you when you age, you sort of lose your uh imagination more because it becomes more like gosh, I wish I could remember the exact example, but he gives a very specific example, and I believe it's his book, Can Man Live Without God? I believe is the title of it. And he gives this very specific example that I'm not even gonna try to, like, really go into because I'll butcher it, but it's basically, he took a scenario and explained the reaction of, like, he had a very young kid and then, like, like, probably 6 to 9, somewhere in there range year-old kid, and then, like, a teenager. And he had each of them sort of give their thoughts on the thing, and they were sort of progressively more pessimistic, if you will,
yeah,
about what the thing could be. And it's like very clearly the youngest had the wildest imagination about what it could be, and it was I mean it was stark, frankly, and clear that it's not. I mean, yes, the person who is older and more educated and able to make more philosophical distinctions, that that child, that teenager, whatever, was definitely looking at the more objectively true thing, right? Was looking at the more real thing. Uh, but were they necessarily better off? I I don't know. And so there's this delicate balance, especially when we look to things like, like you and I both being Christians and things like that. For example, the book that I'm talking about was in the context of God, right? And so while on the one hand we want to have answers, we want to have evidence, we want to have logic, we want our stuff to be supported by facts and this, that, and the other thing. At the same time, there's a beautiful mystery to be a human and trying to interact with the, divine. And I mean, not to get like too mystical here or anything, but like, the idea being that you really need to keep the sense of wonder alive, because that sense of wonder and that sense of magic or whatever that we sadly like lose as we get older is still something that we could very much benefit from in our daily lives. And so uh, I just wanted to underscore that with stretching your imagination. I think that that is an important thing. And I think that that is one of the main benefits of fiction.
well, well said, and it leads 100% directly to my second point, which is again a kind of serious tone, but fiction helps you relate to your children, and
Yeah.
I'm saying this not like looking down my nose at people, but I know that a lot of parents do struggle with relating to their kids, especially younger kids, or if you have children a little bit later in life, like what Steve was saying, the older you get, the kind of more objective and I wouldn't say cold, but just more kind of straightforward looking you are rather than, kind of head in the clouds and with that kind of mindset. So, I mean, I just think a great example that I've used before is when I was 7 years old, my stepdad would listen to the Hobbit dramatic cassette tapes with me and my stepbrother. And obviously, I knew he liked it because he was always into Lord of the Rings, but I know that me and my stepbrother enjoyed it so much more because we were kids and it was so exciting.
Yeah.
And uh, he related, uh, my stepdad was able to relate to us and form those bonds with us so much more better than if he came home and tried to describe his job of vibration analysis testing on machines at a paper mill,
Mm,
and so even
such a good
though
point.
even though Lord of the Rings, really when it comes down to it, is a silly thing. None of it's real. It doesn't, it's whatever in the end. But that formed so much of our conversations and being able to bond and talk about cool stuff, and just led to other more natural conversations and more creative stuff like building Legos that were maybe something about Lord of the Rings. And it just opens up the door for so many things, and kids
Yeah.
naturally are just imaginative. And so if you open the door for even just a little bit of that fiction in your life, that imagination, um, man, really just opens up the door to really get into your kid's heart, to be quite honest. And they
Man.
that really, if you so that's one thing I've always tried to really hope is I never lose sight of what it was like as a kid experiencing those things, because I know that, Evie's going through the same thing what I did as a kid, and so does every kid, and they just want to have fun. And so having fun with them requires you to kind of open up a bit there.
Man, that's a really strong insight, and probably one that I need to personally take to heart, because I do have difficulty relating to my kids. And, uh, hmm, hmm. Yeah, what I was just thinking what's interesting is the things it's actually really selfish of me. The things that I most relate to them about are definitely related to fiction, but I find I'm only interested to really engage with them on those things which, in my own childhood, I was fascinated by and
Mhm.
drawn to, right? So, for example, Power Rangers. My kids love Power Rangers. I have no problem carrying on a conversation about the world of Power Rangers with my kids. But, like, outside of that and maybe 1 or 2 other little things, I very much, like, take a I don't wanna say d you know, p pessimistic or, like, downer approach, but it's almost that. I'm always just like, like, that's fake. Like, stop. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I just
I get
downplaying that
that.
because
Yeah.
I do spend so much of my time in the quote, unquote, "real world," right?
Mm.
Whether we're talking about the world of business or the world of, you know, apologetics and theology, things like that. I feel, philosophy. I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about what is real. And I always want to be so careful to make the distinction between what is real and what is fake because we live in a world where, man, those, and just in many ways that we're not going to get
Mhm.
into now, but those lines are tough, right? And blurry for some people. And so I definitely want to I definitely wanna, like, keep a hard distinction there between those 2,
Yeah.
between what is real and what is not real as my kids get older. At the same time, you are entirely right that there is a level of relating to your kids and understanding your kid's heart that you will never really be able to achieve unless you, in a sense, humble yourself and allow you to become part of that magic, become part of
Mhm.
that world. And so, yeah, I needed that lesson. So,
That's
good
good.
good stuff.
Um,
Alright, what's next?
yeah, I'll move on to my final one, and then I'll kick the ball over to you. But this last one is kind of my personal like favorite, I guess, what keeps me invested in fiction and why I love it so much, and that's because you can experience the impossible. And I guess what I mean by experience is like really almost people use the word literally too much, almost quite literally, put yourself in a position and truly almost be able to experience what that fictional story or location or setting wants you to feel. So fiction allows you to experience things that are literally impossible that seem very, very real. One example, and maybe you've never experienced this. I know that I have, and I know that other people have. But anytime I am invested in a show, I guess a nonfiction show, a reality TV show, but I'm talking about fiction shows, as most shows are. Sometimes a movie, but it's mostly a long series or a book, and then like a long show. When you get to the end of it and you watch the final episode, you almost feel like really sad or bummed out because like those characters are gone and they're done. And I don't think it's more than just you're upset that there's no more episodes. It's you're upset that there's the characters' stories don't go on, that their lives are just ended. It seems wrong and kind of really sad in a way. And I think there's a reason for that. It's because those characters don't just seem real, but they are real to you. They exist in your head in this, own little world. And you were able to, speaking of like a show, you were able to view them and relate to them and to you, like those characters are real. And so when something like that ends, you really feel it. Um,
Yeah.
and I kind of just wrote this down, but if none of it is real, why do we feel that way? And it's because, especially, and we've talked about this before, but fiction, when it's grounded in reality, which I think it makes for the best kind of fiction, it does kind of create its own reality in a way. A great example, we come to this all the time, but it's so great, is Dune, where none of that, I mean, like, none of that exists. The planets, the technology, just the kind of, I guess you can say, for lack of a better word, the magic system in it, just none of it is real. But man, probably more so than almost any other fiction, fantasy, or sci-fi that I read, that seems like so real. The world and everything that is in it. And so, yeah, being able to read fictional stories or watch fictional shows that are that well told helps us to experience relationships, places, and go on adventures that we would never been able to go to. And so, again, how does that benefit life in the end? I don't know. But just for me personally, as looking at it from an experience point of view, it's just an awesome thing that a story that is not real can be real to you, and it's just such a cool thing.
Man, I love that. I'll be honest, to me, it brings me all the way back around to the first couple episodes that we recorded. There, it's just it is a it is no for C.S. C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, I mean, not to totally rehash this again, but Lewis was not persuaded to Christianity through arguments and evidence and facts and data and things like that, even though the irony is that he actually became, in case you don't know, a ardent, sort of philosopher and apologist. I mean, he wrote one of the absolute best books on the subject called Mere Christianity. Maybe you don't know that, but he did. But that's not why he became a Christian. He became a Christian ultimately because Tolkien was able to sort of persuade him of this idea that Christianity was the myth that was true. It was the true myth. It was the one that it had all the elements of of imagination, of wonder, of something that really felt like one of his quotes says, if I'm gonna not get it exact, but I'm getting the gist of it here, is if I find in myself something that finds me longing for um for another world, then it could be that I was made for another world, or it seems logical,
Mhm.
then
Yeah.
the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world. And so in Lewis, I mean, I think it's very clear in his writing and everything that he sort of felt this longing and this desire. And so, yeah, I mean, the whole idea being that you say experience the impossible, for example, that's kind of how you framed the
Yeah.
last thing. And I think part of the reason why that's so powerful for a human being is precisely because um what feels like is impossible is actually possible. In the sense that most people are, how do I want to put this? Most people are very fact, they live in the world, or at least they think they live in the world of facts and data, even if they're wrong, like about those facts and data. They at least think that they're living in that sort of grounded uh real world. When in reality, all of the media that they consume is media that talks about a world that is greater or beyond the natural, the
Mhm.
physicalistic. Why is everybody obsessed with MCU movies, right? Why is
Yeah.
everybody obsessed when the new Star Wars comes out, or whatever? It talks about, right. What most people don't realize is that the real world is a whole lot more like these fictional worlds than
Yep.
we're often led to believe, and that's exactly what Lewis understood, and what ultimately persuaded him to believe in Christianity. Again, to tie up that thread, because he saw in it the mythical elements, the mythos that seemed to resonate with the longing and desire of the human heart, while at the same time was able to look at the grounding of the facts of history, and experience, that this was a true, it was a true story that happened, and yet had those echoes of a world that was a lot more exciting than what most people think it is, and so that's what ultimately persuaded Lewis. And I think that sort of thing, if if we talked about it more, could also be used to persuade a lot of people. There's actually a book. I'll go ahead and uh, what am I looking for? Promote that. Point you to it. I don't know. There's a new
Plug
book
it in.
by Frank Turek. Um, I think it's called Hollywood Heroes.
Mm.
I think is the name of the book.
Yeah, I think
A
so.
brand new book, and it basically just talks about how, I mean, not in, I've just to kind of summarize it. It basically talks about how, all your ideas in Hollywood are just kind of really stolen from the Jesus story, right? How Jesus is
Mhm.
really the true superhero, that the others are merely a, sort of an echo or a shadow of. So anyway, I just thought that was a very, very interesting thing that you said there, and I think there's the next level to take it to is, yeah,
Yeah.
experience the impossible. Well, maybe the impossible is actually possible.
Lewis's conversion story, I think is my personal favorite. Um, it just gets
Pretty
me
cool,
every time. The fact that he and Token lived at the same time and were friends, it just
right?
seems it's just
Isn't
so
it
crazy.
amazing?
Like, what an
It's
awesome
amazing.
thing. All right, Steve, why don't you finish up off here and give us your benefits of fiction? I know we you probably rolled off already a lot just in conversation, but let's go through your list here.
Yeah, why yeah, so I'll definitely just some of I'll roll through kind of quickly. So creativity, right? I think we kind of covered that, right? The idea fiction makes you more creative, helps you think outside of the box. It's a one of the things that I like to do. It's funny. I was actually just in a meeting today, and I wanted to like articulate this with them, but just contextually, I wasn't, it wasn't really something that I had the latitude to do. I'll just kind of leave it at that. But so many people are obsessed with, oh, what's my competitor doing? What's this guy over here? Like, it's almost eating like back in high school where you like look at somebody else's paper,
Yeah.
and and what you realize when you do that is you look at you end up creating something that looks a lot like what other people in your industry or whatever are doing, instead of something um entirely unique. And so one of the guys that I talk about a lot, one of the, Basecamp is the software that I use, and for project management, and they have another tool, an email tool called Hey. And I've always loved the color scheme in Hey. And it looks like no other piece of software that I am aware of. And it's like this, I don't want to say neon, but it's almost like this mix of pastel, like greens and purples and blues. And you would never expect this out of a I mean, if you look at any other software product, you're not going to get this kind of inspiration. And why is that? Well, it's because when these guys look for inspiration, they literally don't look at what their competitors are doing at all.
Mm.
They study nature. And it's like Jason, the CEO, just kind of asked himself, like, why does this particular like green, purple, blue, like, why does it just look so stinking awesome together?
Mm.
And you never would have thought to do so, but he saw it probably in a flower or something, puts it in this product, and it looks insane. Like
That's cool.
hey.com. Go check it out. Hey.com. I mean, and you'll see the colors right there and everything. And it's just like, yeah,
HEY?
HEY. Yeah, hey.com. They spent a lot of money on that domain. Um, and it's just like it's such a cool color combination that you would never learn from like looking at a piece of software. What's my point? Well, my point is that as helpful as nonfiction is, in learning about what others in your industry are doing, etc., a lot of times you can find ideas by looking at other industries in the real world, or I mean, again, even getting ideas and things from fiction, things that you can apply to what you do. So as you're
Awesome.
working in the real world, a measured dose of fiction, I think, can help make you more creative.
Hmm.
Um, Attention to detail is
That's a
another
that's a
thing.
great one. That's a good one, Steve.
Yeah, I think so. I think that fiction teaches you to pay attention.
Mm.
Michael Heiser, one of my favorite theologians, right, he's very much in this vein of, especially the sort of subject matter that he covers, um, is what's the best way to put it? Basically, there's a lot more to the Bible than most people learn in Sunday school.
Yeah.
A lot more to the biblical worldview, especially the spiritual dynamics of the biblical worldview. And I feel it's worth noting that I mean, he's not a crackpot, right? I mean, he's a celebrated scholar, and many other scholars, sort of verify, or, that they also promote his work. In other words, he's, you know, by all accounts, he's right, in sort of the stuff that he says, even though it would sound surprising to many who grew up in the church in the last 50, 60 plus years. And what he says really shocks people when he's talking about this sort of stuff for the first time
Mm,
with audiences. He'll say that most people read the Bible like a nonfiction, like a didactic, like historical account. And obviously there are portions of the Bible that are meant to be read that way. But what people really don't realize is that the way that writing happened back then is a lot more like how fiction writers
mm,
write today, in the sense that the writers are trying to do something to you. Okay. So when you read fiction, you sort of come with the assumption, with the worldview in mind, that something is happening to you while you read. Like, you sort of know you're being manipulated, you're being drawn into certain places, you're being drawn away from certain places, your attention is being intentionally
mm.
messed around with. Um, he says that we should read the Bible, for example, that way. Be because of the kind of writing that it was, the same sort of thing is happening. So what's my point? Well, my point is that fiction writing can actually teach you to pay attention to detail, because they are trying to manipulate you, because
Yeah.
they are trying to draw your attention away from some things and toward other things, and they're trying to, we talk about show don't tell, right? The cardinal rule or whatever of writing, show don't tell. Um, that just doing that. I mean, I don't even know how to do it, and I know that requires an intense level of intentionality, and concentration to be able to like show you something without telling you something, and that the writers just have to pay attention to detail to do that, and so that is something that you can pick up and learn from them.
Mm,
Imagination, we covered in depth, so that's cool.
yeah.
Drive is related to imagination, but by drive, I specifically mean, like, I think, I mean, how many I mean, you can't tell me that Elon Musk is not somewhat motivated by science fiction, right? I mean,
Mm,
like, there's no way that, I mean, yeah, like, he's dealing with science reality, of course. But like, how many people dream of going to the stars based on what they've read on in, or watched or whatever in science fiction? I mean, it's like Star Trek, fake, whatever, fiction, prophecy, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. In some weird sense, Star Trek gives me drive. It gives me a drive for exploration. When I see the the beginning credits or whatever, the opening credits or whatever you call it, where the theme song plays for Star Trek Enterprise, I'm like, frick yeah! Like, I want to be an
I
astronaut. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it gets me.
want to die on Mars.
I want to die on Mars. Yeah. So I think that's an element. Um, and then sort of the last one that I mentioned, I'm sure there's others, but the last one that I thought of before we were prepping here, or while we were prepping, was reflection upon reality. Reflection upon reality. And what I mean by that is kind of like what I was talking about with the myth that is true stuff. Is that when you're reading fiction, there it would be a mistake to think of fiction as, and we talked about this a little bit before, but it'd be a mistake to think of fiction as fake. Um, because fiction is real. And you even mentioned this earlier, I think, right? Fiction is, it's real, but it's not. Right? It's real, but it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
in that sense, right? It is a real fiction, and and because of that, fiction often tells true stories. Um, Maybe I can use this analogy. It's using the vehicle of a fake story that is carrying the cargo of a real story.
Mm,
So
that's well
fiction,
put.
yeah. So fiction is and to give credit where it's due, I actually stole that analogy from a scholar named I forget what his name is. Anyway,
Good tramp.
I stole it from him. Yeah, yeah. And I don't know why his name's slipping my mind. I stole it from him because I actually, like. It's funny, is I actually disagree. I agree with him, but he's criticizing somebody else using that analogy, and I agree with his criticism of it.
Yeah.
But I do think it's an apt analogy for what we're talking about here. I think fiction, and actually because it's an apt analogy here, I disagree with it in the other context. Anyway, whatever. I'm speaking vaguely now, but the
Yes.
point is that fiction teaches you an awful lot. about how to be in the real world. And uh, I think too often, not always, but too often, nonfiction writers tend to like tell you how they think it is, and it's not that way. Whereas
Mhm.
fiction writers, I think a lot of times are tapping into something a lot more deep, a lot more real, but it's also a little bit more subtle. Like they may not even be realizing that they're doing it. For example, I don't think most people are writing stories about Hollywood heroes thinking, "Oh yeah, we're ripping off of Jesus," and yet there's an entire book arguing that basically they are. And so fiction can help you reflect upon reality. I think that's something that's very strong about it, even though you may not realize it's happening to you.
Again, trying not to paint with a broad brush, but it is kind of funny how if you see like nonfiction stuff, whether it's a newspaper article or someone trying to write a book about people's behavior, a lot of times you'll read it and think like, why is this person thinking that? Like that's not true, or people don't behave that way, even though it's a nonfiction book. But in order to write a successful fiction story, you have to accurately depict reality. Like you have to understand how people interact
Yes.
well. You have to know consequences of certain reactions. And so you
Yeah.
definitely
That's awesome.
I would say it's definitely a requirement that you have to know humans and civilization and the human condition and everything in order to write good fiction.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where not to keep coming back to this, but I mean that's where it's almost like the beach ball, right? So in the book of Romans, in the Bible, it talks about how you're gonna have people who the terminology that's used there is suppress the truth and unrighteousness. Okay, and what it means is that it's kind of like a beach ball. You ever go to the beach or you're playing in a pool or whatever, and you try to hold a beach ball down, but the minute you're not thinking about holding the beach ball down and your hand slips off of it, what happens? The beach ball flies up to the top of the surface. And so, not to psychoanalyze people, but I think this really does happen a lot in fiction, in the world of fiction writing. Um, People tap into things, the human condition, for example. We're all sinners. We all need a savior. We all feel a guilt that sometimes we can't explain. Themes like this that at least the biblical worldview has an answer to, and that many religions try to at least have some sort of answer to. These sorts of things are embedded in all good stories, because we resonate with them as humans, and stories that don't have these elements don't resonate with us as humans, and they become duds. They're not good stories, and this is because somebody who might write a nonfiction book, philosophically thinking carefully, might have his hand on the beach ball, right, holding the beach ball down, but then in a moment of, where his guard is down and he's writing fiction, he's trying to be imaginative, he's trying to think about humans actually are. Um, the hand slips away and the beach ball comes flying up to the surface. And this is why, right? This is why people who um are not. I'll give you a great example, and then we can move on to stories of the week. Okay, two of my favorite Star Trek characters are active on Twitter. They're in real life, right?
I mean,
Jonathan,
just gonna say,
yeah,
wow, that's pretty impressive.
yeah, you're right. Yeah, Jonathan Frakes, who plays Commander Riker in Star Trek, and I mean, it's not an exaggeration to say that my son, while it's spelled differently, is basically named after him. Jonathan Frakes, and then Marina Sirtis, um, and she played what was her name? She played, Princess Troy? Was it Troy? For some reason, I can't remember. Anyway, Marina Sirtis. So, I saw this a little while ago, and I know this is not necessarily fiction, but it I don't know, kinda is. So, uh, eh, this is gonna be politically charged, what I'm gonna say, and so I want you to think not in terms of like, "Oh, I can't believe you said that." I want you to think more in terms of logic, okay? Just think purely in terms of logic and consistency, okay? So she says, how many children have to die before America or before Americans put a child's right to life ahead of their right to own a gun? I'm going to read that again very slowly. How many children have to die before Americans put a child's right to life ahead of their right to own a gun? And Jonathan Frakes retweeted that and said, excellent question. You know,
Excellent
And
question.
my immediate thought, now again, no secrets here. I mean, I have views on some of these issues. I'm a Christian, I'm conservative, whatever. You might have a different view, and that's fine. Again, I just want you to think clearly, right there, right there. I would have a question for her, and that question would be, where do you stand on the issue of abortion? And I have good reason to suspect that she is on probably the progressive liberal side of where she stands on abortion. I think I have read, even though I don't know for sure, because number one, she's talking about gun rights from a negative point of view, which probably means she's progressive, and she also has pronouns in her Twitter profile, which also means that she's probably progressive. And so that's two good pieces of evidence to suggest that she would probably believe in a woman's right to choose. So when she's defending, if she does defend a woman's right to choose, so the right for a woman to have an abortion, um, when she's defending that right, I would say she's holding down the beach ball. But when reality sets in and she lets her hand off the beach ball, it pops up, and now she starts asking about how many children have to die before we talk about a child's right to life, completely ignoring that if she is a supporter of abortion,
Mm.
then a child dies. Many children die every single day and have for a very long time as a result of those exact rights. So I'm just using that as a case study. Again, you might disagree with me, and I'm sorry to be politically charged. I don't mean to be necessarily. I'm just saying like that's an issue. That's kind of like what I'm talking about. That sort of thing I think happens in fiction writing all the time, where the beach ball is being suppressed, but then in fiction, the hand kind of comes off, the guard goes down, and we see how reality really is. And so that kind of buttons that point up, right? Fiction is definitely a reflection of reality, as you say. It's kind of a requirement, and I think that makes it important for us to engage with.
Yeah, good point. Good discussion, Steve.
Yeah, man. Cool.
That was a good that was a good talk. Well,
Yeah,
longer than I thought, but man, that was
yeah.
good.
I thought this should have been a
I
part one, part
Steve and I thought that this would have been like a real quick one, but we just got
here
into
we
it.
are.
This is
Can't
actually
do it. It's impossible.
turned out to be one of my favorite ones, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
I'd
Yeah,
put
very
it in
good.
like the top 23, 24.
Yeah, I reckon I would too.
Yeah.
Uh,
I reckon so.
that's good.
All right, so story of the week. I'll go ahead and start.
Yeah,
I
you go
just got
first.
blurry there on screen for quite a bit. So
Uh-oh.
yeah, my story of the week. So do you know the show This Is Us?
I've never watched it. I have heard of it. I think
Sh-
my wife used to watch it.
Oh,
So
I'm really blurry. So it's if it's not my favorite show, it's one of my favorite shows.
really interesting.
Yeah, so I it comes with the caveat of it's a lot of shows today are very they plug in a lot of like just unnecessary or very obvious like progressive kind of tones to
Sure.
it that
Yes.
involve just a plethora of things. This show does to a certain extent, but it's a very it never feels like it's forced down your throat. It more or less it just feels like natural situations that people go through in life. And so but this show, I've watched it, I think after like the second season release, we started watching it, and I've just been hooked ever since. And it is yeah, it just combines everything from a great fictional story, from the writing and specifically film, just the moments that are captured for actors in certain scenes. Um and, I mean, this show's probably made me, tear up more than anything I've ever read or watched before. Just a great show. But anyway, the reason why I bring it up specifically is because, the last season, I guess the last episode just premiered yesterday, I believe. And so I'm on the last season now. I still have some episodes to catch up on, but apparently, it's at least from the reviews that I've seen, people are just saying like giving it like 10 out of 10 and saying it's just
Mhm.
like a phenomenal ending to a phenomenal story. So I'm really excited about it. This story, what it does is they evolve a lot of I would call I can't think of the specific term, but flash forwards where it kind of
Yeah.
gives you a hint of what's going to happen. And then sometimes it'll like make you wait a whole season to like actually get back to that point. And
Oh wow.
every time it does a flash forward, it never feels like it's leaving you hanging. It always makes you like feel like emotional a certain way, like, wow, like this actually is gonna happen to this character. Like, how the heck does this come about? And it just a phenomenal show. Anyway, I highly recommend it. So anyway, that's my story of the week. So
How many
highly recommend the show.
seasons?
6,
How many?
and they're done after 6, or supposed to be done after 6.
Interesting. Yeah, I just saw this is not my story of the week, but I just saw where the Orville. Have you ever heard of the Orville?
I don't think I have, no.
So man, So the Orville is a comedy that is Seth MacFarlane is the main character, and it was
Oh my
canceled.
gosh.
It was canceled for a while, and I just saw where it's coming back in, like, July, and I thought it was totally canceled, but apparently it's not, or maybe a different studio bought it. But it's basically like a farce, um,
Of Star
Star
Trek?
Trek. Yeah, that's kinda based on.
Seth MacFarlane is I assume he's like the ship's captain or something?
Mhm, yeah,
Oh my goodness.
it's actually so 2 things. So, it's kinda based on, it has and when I say based on, I mean, like, at least, the network where it was before, it literally they hired the same 2, like, producers and everything as the original not the original Star Trek, but Star Trek: The Next Generation, which,
Oh, wow.
for many might as well be the original Star Trek. I mean, I can bukus of people who've never seen the original series who have seen Next Generation.
It
And so it's sort
it
of based
looks
on
like
that era, and I have to say, it is hilarious because Seth MacFarlane and the cast is just hilarious, but, like, it's really a genuinely good show, and it honestly, like, reminds me I mean, yeah, I mean, it's made to be that sort of quality of at least the Star Trek back then.
That's
Is
interesting.
that yeah,
It
same
has really good reviews.
yeah,
Like, yeah,
it's
uh,
actually a really good show beyond just being a farce of Star Trek, so
that's cool.
that
I'll have to check it out.
reminded me of that.
Right.
I do have 2 stories of the week, hopefully quick. My actual story of the week, what is, so we talked recently, maybe have we? Have we? I don't know. Um, uh, we're into the fights, right? We're into UFC. Um, and recently there was a really big debacle where a fighter who his name was Charles Dubronx Oliveira, and Brazilian dude, most submissions in UFC history, pretty crazy stuff. And, just a monster to watch. I mean, the dude's like a spider that'll choke you like a boa constrictor, if you can
Insane.
imagine. And, so he actually missed weight before his last fight by 0.5 pounds. So by half a pound, he missed his weight. And turns out, Rogan was talking about this, on a podcast recently. So it turns out the issue was because there apparently, there's sort of like how do I wanna put this? There there are officials who, like, calibrate the scale, but, uh, fighters are allowed to come, like, weigh on the scale, and because they are from, like, different places, like, some are from Brazil, some are from United States, some are from, wherever, there's, like, different like weights and measurements that need to be calibrated in order for the scale to be accurate. And there was previously no real rules around that. Like people, like fighters could come adjust the scale to be calibrated for their needs, in order to make sure that they were measuring themselves accurately. And they could just do that. And apparently, what people were saying is that that calibration was off, and this is why Oliveira did not make weight. And so, I mean, it seems to be a purely technical problem that happened, and I don't think anything was done retroactively, but my understanding is that there is now, as a result of this, a the scale for the UFC weigh-ins is now under 24/7 guard, by a paid somebody is paid to guard the UFC scale 24/7 to make sure that folks can't just use it and calibrate it, offhandedly or whatever. Even if they don't mean any harm. I mean,
Yeah.
nothing intentional was happening here. I mean, there was no sabotage as far as I know. It's just something that actually that happened, and so now they actually have a guard in place to avoid
A as a
circumstances in the
as
future.
a fa as a fan of the UFC, it just makes it so much more exciting. Like, there's a guard watching it now. I
I
love just
know.
any of this stuff. It's just so
Mhm.
fun. I hope now that the no one holds the belt because Oliveira, even though he won his last fight, he couldn't get it. So the next fight between he and whoever else, it better be a freaking awesome one.
It better be
Without
out.
a doubt,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
gotta be good.
It's gonna be, you know, it will be though. It's
Oh, it
gonna be
will
sick.
be. Yeah,
I'm so excited
absolutely.
already. I'm excited already about it. Yeah. So I think that's gonna be great. You know, I really love it. I mean, I conned my wife into watching it with me the other night, and I actually it really didn't take much persuasion. She came in there and she was actually kind of getting into it, and and she's like, so like, what's the point? Like that they're hurt, like they're actually trying to hurt each other. And I was like, yeah, this is the real deal.
This is
This
the real
isn't
deal.
this
This
is
ain't no
WWE
WWE.
stuff. These people like legitimately like fight and they fight to win and there's like respect and it's like an actual discipline. So it's anyway, it's really interesting. The other quick one is okay, all right, Alex. This is the true test. Back in the day, did you watch Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, the cartoon on Disney?
I will one up you. I played the old Chip and Dale video game on the NES, quite frequently.
Nice. Really interesting. Have you seen the new Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers that is currently out?
I have heard about
Okay.
it.
We watched it last night.
And
Now,
how was it?
I'm actually going to maybe shock you, maybe not. I actually never really saw the original Chip and Dale
Mhm.
Rescue Rangers. So I liked like some of the other shows like Tailspin and stuff,
Yeah,
but I never actually saw of course I know who Chip and Dale are, don't get me wrong, but I
right.
never actually watched Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. And so I was a little skeptical that I would really need to have a lot of context. And I didn't really need the context. I'm sure it would have helped. But it was I watched it on Disney Plus last night, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, and it is honestly, it's not one of the best movies I've seen, but as far as a comedy, I will say that it had me rolling consistently. It might okay, I might be willing to say it's actually one of the best comedies that I've seen. Now, I don't know what the critical reviews are, whatever, but it's also so number one, it was just freaking hilarious, and then also it had tons of Easter eggs, and I'm a sucker for an Easter egg. Okay, I
Mhm.
when I see an Easter egg in something, I'm like, oh man, it's on. I have to go watch the YouTube videos. I have to go see what everybody's saying about it. Tons of Easter eggs. Um,
Hmm.
and in fact, my first comment, I actually had to pause it because I came in there about 20 minutes late. I was doing something and I had to finish up something I was working on, and my wife and kids had started the movie. So I got there about 20 minutes late. And even 3 minutes in of when I started watching it, I was like, oh my gosh, this seems really meta. I'm confused. So I paused it and I asked her, okay, what happened? Like, what's going on here? And so I'm not gonna spoil anything, but like it's the sort of the premise of it is that it's not Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, it's the actors, right? It's Chip and Dale, the actors. Uh,
Ah, gotcha.
and so it's like, like again,
That's cool.
Chip had his CGI surgery, so it's set in the real world. It's a live action film, but you have animated Dale, and then you have CGI animation Chip, and then others across the spectrum, and it's all really meta. So the Rescue Rangers
Yeah,
was a show that these 2 were a part of back in the day, but they're no longer the Rescue Rangers. That was just their show.
that's
And
cool.
it is actually it's actually I thought it was really well written. I thought the Easter eggs were awesome. I'm a huge Disney fan, so that was, whatever.
Cool.
It is well worth a watch. It had me rolling. I thought it was really great. So,
I'll give it a try. So 2 thumbs up from Steve.
yep. So my literally the first words out of my mouth about the movie were, "This seems really meta." And then I Googled it this morning, to see if there were any good reviews out or anything like that, and one of the reviews was titled "The Limits of Meta."
Mhm.
And so I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Somebody else gets it." So it was pretty intense. It was very intense from the meta standpoint. So be ready for it, but you
That's
should
cool.
absolutely watch it as soon as you can. Fantastic movie. So
That's
my
really
opinion at
cool.
least.
Have you ever seen gameplay of the old Chip and Dale game?
No,
Ever you get the
never.
chance, I looked it up a little bit ago, and, the game for, like, an NES game was quite good.
Really?
Yeah, just look up, some gameplay of it, you might be surprised. I mean, for an old game, everyone listening to should too. It's, playing that as a kid, it seemed kinda just unreal how fun it was. I just remember it being so good. There's a no, there's a couple. Yes. Yes, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, NES. It was just I don't know,
Yeah.
just something about it that was so good.
Cool. I'll check it out for sure.
Anyway,
Very good.
good
All
stuff,
right.
Steve.
Yeah,
Couple
man.
tangents today, but all worthwhile.
All worthwhile. Yep, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you everyone for listening. Appreciate it. I'm not going to be long and drawn out here. I'm going to let you go because you've hung around for a while. God bless. Take care. We'll see you in the next one.
Tell your friends.